for Eric Loyd.
Thank you. I don't know how many of you were here for Seamus's talk, but it actually dovetails very nicely with what I'm going to be doing today. The idea was to take all of the Nagios product, or all the products in the Nagios suite of products, and use them as sort of an ecosystem to monitor itself. That's sort of the experiment that we're looking at. So if I get my little thing going here. So one quick note, that Nagios 15, by the way, in case you haven't already figured this out, should be NagiosCon 2015. So if you're live tweeting my exciting presentation, please make sure you use the correct hashtag. So a little bit about me, a little bit about Bitnetix, and this thing called Everwatch. You'll see there's my laser pointer actually work up here? I don't even know. Yeah, so little icons in the corner, free advertising, I guess. I was hired in 2004 to deploy what was at the time Nagios Core 1.2 at Kodak. So I've just dated myself, I guess. We upgraded to the 1.3, 1.9, 2 point something, 3 point something, and then I left. So somewhere in 2006, I actually founded Bitnetix as an IT consulting company. We also provided voice over IP services. 2012, which was also the first time I presented at the Nagios conference, became a Nagios reseller. You could kind of see what we've done since the big things. 2014, last year, we actually are spinning off our Nagios consulting into a new company called Everwatch, hence the I logo. Logo. Just like Troy, Nagios MVP award winner. Hi, Troy. Yes, I want everybody to know Troy has 3 Nagios MVP awards. We only got 1. Well, anyway. 2015 was one of the Nagios dashboard, or Nagios Log Server dashboard contest runner-ups. I think I said that in the right order, for work that I did on an asterisk monitoring dashboard for voice over IP. And congrats to Sean, I don't know, Sean, if you're in here or not, for winning the actual contest. And I've presented ever since 2012 here at Nagios World Conference. It's been a privilege, actually, to do that. And I'm proud to be part of the 5th annual Nagios World Conference. Yay! So what is a fractal? The name of my talk is, of course, Fractal Nagios. Wikipedia, the source of all knowledge in the 21st century. Basically, a fractal is something that looks the same no matter what scale you look at it. So you can look at the little binary tree here, and at the end of every node, it takes a 60-degree turn to the left and a 60-degree turn to the right. And then at the end of every node, it takes a similar turn to the left and turn to the right. So you get this thing, which no matter how you zoom into it, looks like what it looked like at the previous scale. What is Fractal Nagios? So Nagios has this wonderful, as Seamus said, flagship product. I need to update my slide. That needs to say Nagios XI 5 now, since I wrote this before yesterday when XI 5 was released. And around it, we have these other products. There's Core, Incident Manager, Fusion, Reactor, Nagios Log Server, Network Analyzer, etc. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to skip, if you were here 15 minutes ago, you heard me say it, Reactor is my favorite undersung Nagios hero, but we're actually going to leave it out of this presentation. Sorry for anybody who wants to see Reactor in motion. Won't be here. But this whole suite of products is something that can be sort of brought together to do things with itself. He says, waiting for the dramatic pause. There we go. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. This is a beginner sort of overview of what you can do. But I wanted to say what each of these products do on their own. So XI, of course, is mostly monitoring, alerting. You can do escalations. If you're just using XI, or the same applies to Core, then you've got everything in one product that does all of your monitoring, all of your alerting. It can do your event handlers to take action to fix things if they're broken, et cetera. Fusion brings to the mix the ability to do this higher level overview. And I want to stress, just like Seamus stressed, it's a visualization. It's not configuration. It's not management. It's visualization of multiple Nagios XI or Nagios Core interfaces. So we'll get into each of these a little bit farther as we go along. But it's an interface. Network Analyzer collects data from devices which can send data and in the form of NetFlow, S-Flow, and all the other flow things that are out there, and captures that. It also has the ability to do its own alerting, and I don't know what it says there with source destination ports. I think that was supposed to be on one line. But the idea that you can track where your traffic is coming from, as well as where your traffic is going to with Network Analyzer. Bad color choice, reactor, we're going to skip it. But it's kind of like an event handler on steroids. If you're familiar with event handlers, they're things that will fire off after the end of a Nagios service check that can potentially take action. Generally, the idea is to have it fix something that's broken before it gets worse. With Reactor, you can take that to the nth degree and do some very complex and very cool things. But again, we're going to skip that today. Incident Manager is sort of a lightweight ticket management system. I don't want to take any thunder away from what it is because it's very good. But it's not a ServiceNow, it's not an Eventum, it's not that sort of thing where you have this ecosystem of ticket management. You really have a repository of tickets, and those tickets are managed through API calls from other things. And in this case, that's going to be Nagios XI. And lastly, in this ecosystem, we have the Nagios Log Server, which introduced last year and is my new favorite Nagios product, and takes all that log, security, application, et cetera, data, collects it. There was a talk, an hour or two ago about it, and does some really great things with, again, alerting, and you could use it for security monitoring and things like that. All of these things on their own are great products, but I thought, hey, what if we take all these things and we use it as an experiment to kind of monitor itself? So we invented this environment with Nagios Fusion sitting on top of a Nagios XI and a Nagios Core interface. We're going to add Log Server, Network Analyzer, and Incident Manager into the mix, and just kind of see what this beast looks like. And before I go any farther, you all put your Nagios tattoos on, right? Just show your colors, right? So Nagios XI and Core. I'm actually going to use the bottom half of this slide first. We used an existing Core server that we use for our SmartVox voice over IP platform as part of this because it's there, and I was too lazy to bring up a new Core box just for the purposes of this presentation. So there's a Core machine out there that's running and monitoring part of our voice over IP network, and we're just going to use it for Fusion. We're not really going to do much with it here. So in the meantime, we took Nagios XI off of the Nagios downloads page. We deployed an OVF file into VMware, and if nobody knows what that is, just set that to the side for a minute. We set up very minimal checks on the machine just so that we had sort of an environment that we could use internal to this ESX server that we had. Did a couple extra checks, domain expiration, website defamation, and we did a SNMP-based check of some basic parameters on our ESXi server itself. So this is what we did with Core and XI, just to kind of set it up. Nagios Log Server, and again, we deployed this from an OVF file onto our VMware server, added all of the syslog and other related logs like the Nagios log from the Nagios XI box as sources. Again, we kind of left that Core machine off to the side just because we're only using it for Fusion, basically, and that'll make sense in a minute. We created one query within the Nagios Log Server to look for Nagios XI restarts, just as a proof of concept. So I don't know how well this shows up here, but if you read, it says in the query line, successfully launched command file worker with PID, then the PID would come after that. We're only looking for this as a trigger, basically, to integrate that back into XI, just as an example. But you could use Log Server to query any aspect of any of those logs that it's monitoring, including looking for failure actions that might occur inside those logs. In this particular case, the log source, the right-hand gray box, says that it must be on our Nagios XI server. Don't know if you guys can see that, but the idea was we just want to look for Nagios restarts, and we want to do it by looking at the log file itself. So we're pulling that data over to Log Server. We're querying for those data, or for those restarts. And then we can do something with that later. We made a new NRDP server, I guess, isn't quite maybe the right word, but connection back to our XI server within Nagios Log Server Administrator. There's a key that you need that you give from Nagios, which is it? Help me out. You either give the Nagios XI key to Log Server or vice versa. We'll find out here in a minute. I don't know why we blacked it out, because this is on a private cluster that no one's going to talk to. But anyway, there's a token there that you need that authenticates the Log Server to XI so that the two can communicate with NRDP. And the idea is, if you're familiar with NRDP, this will be a review. If you're not, it's basically a remote way for another server to send a check result back to a Nagios server. So we're going to have our Log Server send data to our XI server using Nagios Remote Data Processor, I think is the right initials. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But NRDP. Did I get it, Scott? OK. I only know NRDP. I don't remember what they all stand for. And then you can see here there's some alerts, but we'll come back to that as well. We created 2 alerts, one for Nagios restarts, the query that we just created, and one for failed SSH logins. And the criteria for those alerts are up here. They're just sort of random. But the idea is we wanted to have something that we could use as an example just to see how it worked. So again, I don't know how well this translates to rear projection screens up here. But the failed SSH logins are looking at 2 results in every 10-minute interval as a critical. And the bottom one, which is the Nagios restarts, is looking for 1 result every 10 minutes would be considered a critical. And this is, again, just right now when the snapshot was taken. Oh, my goodness, it was just this past Thursday. Everything was groovy, no restarts and no failed logins. But these are the alerts that we're going to use within Nagios to integrate back with Log Server. Moving on. Network Analyzer. Similar to the way that Log Server integrates with XI, Network Analyzer does something the same way. We installed it via the OVF, downloaded directly from the Nagios downloads page, put it on our VM server. We created sources within Network Analyzer for each of our Nagios machines that we have in this Fractal Nagios. And again, we skipped our Nagios core box. So if we look at those sources real quick while I take a drink of water, you'll see Nagios Fusion, Incident Manager, et cetera. These are just F probes installed on each of the Linux boxes that are sending that the NetFlow data, over to our Network Analyzer, so that we can then go back later and look at bandwidth, and we can look at what ports are talking to what ports. We can do security intrusion detection and a whole bunch of other things on Network Analyzer, but then we can also integrate that back into XI, which again is in the center of our little Nagios fractal world. So we send we installed fprobe on all the machines. We send NetFlow data from each machine to the Network Analyzer. We have a nice big dashboard that shows that data is actually being received, even though you can't see the dates and all, which is good, because again, this was Thursday. And easy peasy lemon squeezy, we have a Network Analyzer. Moving on, Incident Manager. Again, Incident Manager is sort of a lightweight ticketing system on its own, but it has a lot of APIs that can be used to do more complex things if you're willing to do the development effort. Luckily, XI does the development effort for us, thank you, and we don't have to do anything to integrate it. So we installed it via an OVF file. Again, I'm not going to bother saying it. We didn't do any real customization on any of these machines. We just did a yum update to make sure that we had security patches installed in the latest operating systems. We did do, in one case, I think, Log Server. The download was not the latest version, so we had to do an update. But other than that, it was just download it, install it, run it. Did no real customization. Similar to all the other things that we had to grab an API token for, we grabbed the Nagios admin API token from Incident Manager. We bring it over into the Nagios XI components screen where you can do the integration. And you'll probably never read this, I guess. Basically, this is the XI component management screen that gives you the integration for XI to connect to IM and vice versa. And you can do some, if you actually could scroll down, you would see that there's some information about how long to wait before creating a ticket. Is XI allowed to actually close the ticket, et cetera, et cetera. This information's all within the XI system or administration tools for components, and the component is the XI, the Incident Manager integration component. At least track of this stuff. We added a queue called Nagios XI Incidents, and then we sat back and watched it populate things with the fact that we intentionally borked some of our software, downgraded, so that we get yum update warnings. And look at that, number 4 on the list there is our main website, bitnetix.com, is down. I really hope that got fixed. That's going to be embarrassing. September 12th. I'm assuming it's been fixed by now. And a couple other things that just sort of showed up there because of the way things were working at the time. There's some memory things because we totally didn't tune the machines at all, and Log Server is a memory pig. So a lot of this stuff is just sort of random noise that happened when we installed everything on one physical server running 6 virtual VMs for Nagios. But at least it shows that Nagios is actually creating these tickets and showing up in Incident Manager. I wanted to stay at a high level, so I didn't delve down too far, but Incident Manager is also doing the alerting for us as well. So when these tickets come in, Nagios is not sending out those messages, Incident Manager is. And then we can do either log back into the interface or reply to those emails and update Incident Manager, which will in turn update, for example, an acknowledgement within Nagios XI if we're solving the problem. But because this is a ticket with updates and different people who could be involved in the process, you've got an auditing trail of who did what and when they did it. Are we there yet? Nagios Fusion. Installed it via the OVF file directly from the Nagios downloads page, put it on our VMware server. We added credentials for our 2 Nagios servers, which look really simple. One is the Nagios XI box, and one is a Nagios core box. So we provide the appropriate Nagios admin passwords and all to get onto those machines. And we verified that we have an actual dashboard, which is the, okay, I don't think this is the default dashboard. No. This is a dashboard that has 2 dashlets added to it, just for high-level overview again, just so you can see there is red stuff and yellow stuff and green stuff, and that we have a Nagios XI and a Nagios core server on our Fusion. Okay, so putting it all together, XI/core is going to monitor everything. And I'm just going to pick on XI because in this case, the core machine that we're only using just so it show up in the dashboard for Fusion. It's monitoring real-world stuff, but it's not stuff that we're worried about for the sake of this presentation. So we've got an XI box that's monitoring all the other boxes. We've got, here it is, Log Server, taking all those log files from all these other applications and bringing it into the Nagios Log Server. We've got network, oops, was that too fast? Anyway, it's just arrows. We've got Network Analyzer that's taking NetFlow data from all those machines. So we've got bandwidth and port utilization and all this other stuff that's going into Network Analyzer. If we were to have things set the way that I thought we were going to have them set, whoops, that's the next slide, sorry. We're going to take Log Server, and we're going to take any of those alerts that are generated because of the queries that we have in Log Server, and the same for Network Analyzer. We're going to send those using NRDP up to the Nagios XI box. But the Nagios XI box isn't going to do anything except open up a ticket in Incident Manager, which is actually going to do the notifications for us. And then if we had pulled Reactor into the mix, any kind of event handler or action would have been done by Reactor instead of an event handler within Nagios XI. So that was kind of how this sort of came together. With the actual checks that we did for this experiment, the idea was just keep it simple. We just want to see how we can use these tools to monitor the rest of these tools. And so with XI, we use the NRP wizard to add services. Mostly, you go to the NRPE wizard within XI and you say what host you want to monitor. Assuming you've got the NRPE client already installed, then you say, I want to monitor this, 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 and this. And you can tell it, I also want to monitor these things which you fill in the blank for. So we just use basic defaults for the most part. We want to look at disk space and memory and processor and that sort of thing. But we also wanted to look at processes that were running. So we made sure that on the Nagios Log Server, for instance, we were looking at the basic processes, but we also wanted to make sure that Logstash and Elasticsearch processes were running, which is what makes Log Server work. So we added those. And again, that's just an NRPE check using check service init plugin. On the Network Analyzer, we did something a little bit similar, but a little bit different. In this case, we added looking for processes via arguments that the running process is using. You may not be able to read it, but the processes are all named something, something, something is the name of the executable that Network Analyzer is running, but then it's got a parameter that determines what source it's collecting data for. And so those sources are all unique to the machines that are sending that data. And so we've got a machine or a check for each machine looking for its own parameter. So there's a Nagios Fusion, Incident Manager, Log Server, Network Analyzer, and Nagios XI. And that is correct. We are using Network Analyzer to send data to itself. It's easier that way. Did that again using NRPE from Nagios XI out to Network Analyzer. So this is not Network Analyzer sending its data to to XI using the built-in integration. This is just Nagios monitoring some random Unix box and checking to make sure that certain processes are running on it. And it happens to be Network Analyzer. In this case, we did the same thing on Fusion box and the Incident Manager box to make sure things like databases are running, web server interfaces are running, and things of that nature. So any of those init level 3 processes that are supposed to be running when the machine is acting normally, we're checking for those specifically. So how it all works, I think you can see where we're going with this. Nagios sits at the top, and it's looking at the rest of the environment. So for the sake of example, it's looking at 3 boxes, Log Server, Network Analyzer, and Incident Manager. And on those boxes, it's looking for the processes that are supposed to run, the health of the machine, memory, disk space, that sort of thing. This is, from the Nagios perspective, what things look like, or from the Nagios XI perspective. When you start looking into sort of the fractal approach, this gets, I don't know, it's easier in my head almost to see it than it is to put it out on a slide. So this picture's going to stay there for a while. But the Nagios XI box is the little balloon on the right-hand side is what it's monitoring. So it's monitoring healths and healths? I just think I made that one up. The health and processes, web interfaces, databases, et cetera, on these individual machines, and all of them that make up the rest of the platform. But then it's sending alerts out through Incident Manager, and if we had Reactor in the mix for dealing with event handlers, it would be taking action using Reactor. At the same time, you've got Log Server taking all this data in, and you can set up queries within Log Server so that you can look for things that you are expecting to find, and you can conversely set queries so that if you don't find those things within a certain period of time, something's wrong. So if you know you're firing off Nagios service checks because you've got a Nagios log file coming into your log server, and it's been 10 minutes since you've seen a Nagios service check go through, something might be wrong with your Nagios server. So unfortunately, in this case, our alerting is done through our Nagios server, which then goes out to the Incident Manager. But if something's wrong with our XI box, it's kind of hard to represent here. The idea is we can have another query on our log server with another alert, which just sends out an email without having to go through XI. So the log server can take its own alerting action if it finds a problem with XI itself. Otherwise, it's going to send everything off to XI and let XI deal with that escalation, or I shouldn't say escalation, deal with the alerting process through Incident Manager. Meanwhile, if we back up for a second, XI, in the process of monitoring the Incident Manager machine, would know, hey, the Incident Manager is not working. Instead of sending my alerts through the Incident Manager, I can also send out an email directly or SMS or make a phone call or whatever it is that you want to do. So the idea is your main monitoring, which is done through XI, is supplemented by monitoring through the analysis of the log files that are coming into Log Server. You can add to that Network Analyzer, looking at bandwidth usage or port connections and things like that to say, there's behavior I'm not expecting, or there's a lack of behavior that I am expecting. And if you see these things that aren't normal, normally we'd fire that off to XI. But again, Network Analyzer, just like Log Server, has the ability to do its own alerting. So you could have a separate set of alerts that fire off an email rather than sending things to XI. So these are kind of the big three here: the Network Analyzer, the Log Server, and XI. Those components all come together to act as the main monitoring structure of this sort of ring of Nagios products. And then, kind of not to be left out here at the end, is Nagios Fusion. And again, Nagios Fusion, its role is to give you kind of a high-level overview of your Nagios servers. So you can start with Fusion, and that's your dashboard, basically, of what it is that you're looking at. And if you see the reds, you can start drilling in and getting closer to what the actual problem is. Fusion itself, I'm going to say right now, doesn't have alerting capabilities or anything like that. That may be something that comes down the road, I don't know. But again, it's just sort of an overview. In and of itself, I threw it in here because I can, I guess. But it's also a critical part of a multi-node Nagios installation. And you want to make sure that you're monitoring that. And we're doing that with XI to make sure that the appropriate processes on our Fusion box are up and running. So this is our Fusion dashboard, again, just so we can now come together and see this as an end. This is what we would be looking at if we were looking at this environment on a daily basis. Now, it's kind of an odd environment because it's only monitoring itself. But you can imagine if you had a couple Nagios boxes in there that are actually doing real-world work, then pulling their log file information back to Log Server, pulling all that network analyzing data back to Network Analyzer, creating those alerts that fire off through Nagios, but then also creating alerts that fire off directly out of email. And you've got a pretty robust system that's capable of monitoring itself while it's monitoring a complex external network. And for those of you that are mathematically inclined, this is the Julia set, which is a very fractal pattern that repeats itself. I don't know how well this little animated GIF will play here, and I was looking at this as I was gathering my images for doing this presentation, and I noticed as I start looking at it, you can actually see patterns emerge in here that look a lot like Nagios to me, and I just thought it was interesting, which is why I called this Fractal Nagios. So, questions? Thank you.
I'm just wondering, while you're playing around with integrating all the different products, which two products were the most difficult to integrate and why?
That's an interesting question. In and of itself, none were difficult to integrate, partly due to the amazing development efforts of Nagios Enterprises. I mean, if I had to sit down a year ago and take what would become Nagios Log Server and integrate that with XI before there was that component integration, for instance, or Incident Manager without the component within XI, I'd have to sit there and I'd have to write a ton of API calls to do what I want to do. So there was no real difficulty in getting these things to integrate. The difficulty in my head, anyway, was what do I do with it now? And especially when you look at Network Analyzer, which is a great tool. Don't get me wrong, I love it. It was actually introduced, 2 years ago, I think? And we've used it on a number of, both internally and for a number of customers of ours. But it's like a one-trick pony almost. You know, no offense to anybody here who was involved in the development effort, but it's hard to figure out, well, what do you do with this data that you're getting about your network if you really don't care about the actual network? And so in this case, it was, well, how do we use NetFlow data from machines where no one's going to communicate to it except those machines themselves? So it kind of flipped on the end, end over end, and said, well, what if we don't get that NetFlow data? Then we know something's wrong. So it was more like from the experiment standpoint of, you know, hey, how would we do this? It was trying to figure out, well, how would we do this without having real-world data? Was kind of the stumbling block. But to actually kind of halfway answer your question,
Incident Manager was actually the hardest thing to integrate, because at first I didn't know where the component manager for Incident Manager was. And the version that came in our OVF was a couple, I didn't look at what the numbers were, but it was one of the components that needed to be upgraded, and it wasn't working with our new Incident Manager install at first. So I scratched my head on that for a while, but we fixed it.
Any other questions? Come on, there's got to be some other questions. Eric's not that good, is he?
You can walk slowly over there if you want.
Actually, not really more of a question, but just a comment. First of all, great job, Eric, for putting this together, because it shows how the various pieces of the Nagios product ecosystem kind of can work together. I just wanted to mention that I really like the fact that you pointed out that specifically with Network Analyzer and Log Server that they actually can do alerting that isn't back to a Nagios server. Right. And it really shows that you can use them to, in fact, make sure that your main monitoring server is functioning correctly. And if it's not, you can alert just via standard email. Right. And the reactor stuff, I also like, even though you didn't put a lot of it in there. It really is the unsung hero. A lot of people haven't actually utilized it. We kind of put it out in beta, and it actually is very, very powerful, but takes a lot of explaining, so I'm sure that's why you left it out.
When I first rolled this together a little bit, my thought was, well, let's actually deploy the platform using Reactor. And I thought, well, that's like a 3-hour presentation right there, let alone, getting into the Fractal aspect of it. But, to kind of add to what Scott was saying, Nagios Log Server, in and of itself, if there were no other Nagios product on the planet, is the one thing I would want to save. I love XI, I love Core, I love all the other stuff, but Log Server is just an amazing tool. It really is. And you and the rest of the team have done a great job on it. Two of the things that I think are great about it is you can essentially throw anything at it as far as text from a log file. It doesn't even have to be text exactly, but you can throw whatever you want at it, assuming you either have or create a parser that will pull out the individual fields, then you can start querying things more effectively. And once you've figured out how to do those queries, then you can start making alerts that will tell you useful information without having to always go through and search through the log server. And I think it's a great product standing on its own, and it integrates beautifully with the rest of the ecosystem, both as kind of a second line of defense, which is what I was kind of going for here, but also as a primary line of defense to say, hey, I'm expecting to see log files and I'm not. What's going on? So, yeah, thank you.
So you've done a great job of showing using especially Log Server to monitor XI and the other parts of the suite. I want to help take that a little bit further and say that Log Server, looking at your event logs coming out of XI, can also help to spot larger problems that are creeping up on you in a large instance. So you've got X number of services that you're constantly monitoring, and you're expecting a certain flow hitting your event log. So this is another way to skin the cat in this in this game that we all play, is if you're looking at that rate of logs coming in through your Nagios XI event log, you're going to know if checks are taking too long, if specific checks aren't coming back. You can put those checks into Log Server to look at the expected, and like you said earlier, if things aren't coming in that you are expecting, look at it that way.
Yeah, again, Log Server really is this powerful, very simple tool in many ways, because it's the one tool in the Nagios suite that lets you look at things the way a human would look at things. XI, Core, they're executing service checks, 0, 1, or 2. Is it okay? Is it a warning or critical? And sometimes it can be very tough to say, well, is this a warning? Because it's textual information that you're looking for. It's not, is it higher than 6 or higher than 10? It's, well, was the word blue or was the word red? kind of thing, or orange or yellow or green. And so Log Server lets you, once you get the data, some history to go back and sort of analyze, you can look at that and you can start looking at those trends, creating the analysis to say, yeah, I expect that this is what I'll get, whether it's per unit time or whether it's per machine or whatever it is, and start creating some of those alerts. And I think that this is kind of what I was exploring is what's another way to look at monitoring besides, well, let's go execute a plugin and let's go get its status check and maybe capture some perf data.
Any other questions? All right.
We are about to implement XI5, and we use, right? Yeah, we use ServiceNow with a huge maintenance force. To bridge those two together with Active Directory, do we need that incident manager in between, or will the API from XI5 suffice? Or is that too high a question for here?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm got the right pay grade to answer it, but the short version is, my understanding is that there's no change to the integration between XI and Incident Manager. So assuming that's the case, then XI would still be the thing that would kind of on a side channel go over here and say, hey, Incident Manager, I've got some information for you. And Incident Manager is going to say, okay, yep, you're authorized to do something. Let's go create a ticket. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that works.
Good. And obviously, somebody higher up in the Nagios food chain can correct me if that's changed.
Any other questions? All right, well, let's get to the most important part of this. I want you to make them feel really good. That was a great presentation. Put your hands together for Eric Loyd.
Thank you.